Hello. I'm going to try a little bit to do some lectures for this course. So this is new, bear with me, and if the lectures aren't clear, just please let me know. So we're in week 2, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the topics of week 2, and I'm going to try to keep it short and just give you a little bit of a broad idea of what we're talking about this week and why it's important. So here's some things to think about whenever we are thinking about the stuff for week 2. Today, in week 2, right, we were learning about pronunciation, and we were learning also about the alphabet, and we're going to learn a little bit about the differences in how to say hello. So that's where we're going to get started. So where we're going to start is in talking about pronunciation, differences in pronunciation, and that kind of thing. Now, so here are some things to remember when it comes to pronunciation. In Spanish, the vowels are very pure. So in English, there is, I think there's something like 5 different ways to pronounce the letter A. In Spanish, this is not true. There is only one way to pronounce each vowel, and that is A, E, I, O, U. Now, in English, when we have vowels together, sometimes this will change the formation of the pronunciation. Sometimes words that even look similar will be pronounced differently. That's a kind of an interesting thing, right, about English language pronunciation. This is just not true in Spanish. In Spanish, all the consonants and all the vowels will always sound the same, no matter what order they're in or where they are. Now, the one thing to look out for in Spanish is that Spanish has accent marks in it. Those accent marks simply tell us where to place our stress whenever we're pronouncing a word. For example, in the word corazón, we know that the stress on that word is going to go at the end of the word because at the end of the word, we have an accent mark on the O. Now, sometimes accent marks tell us to pronounce certain letters differently. For example, with the ñ sound, right, in uña. Or sometimes, right, a double R will tell us, right, that it's different from pronouncing it from a regular R. So R and then ere, right, are 2 different types of pronunciation. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. One thing that is helpful when thinking about Spanish language pronunciation is that it's just going to take a lot of practice, right? You got to listen to a lot of Spanish and practice a lot of Spanish and practice your pronunciation a lot. And I have some videos inside the Brightspace course content that could also kind of help you with some of your pronunciation. One thing that it can help to practice pronunciation in Spanish is to do what we call trabalenguas. A trabalenguas is a tongue twister, right? So one tongue twister in English is, right, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. If Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, how many pickled peppers did Peter Piper pick, right? So that's one that we have in English. I think I probably got it wrong. But there are trabalenguas also in Spanish that can help you with certain sounds, right? So that's one thing that you could do. Here's a very common trabalenguas in Spanish, and I have the words here, right? I'm trying to read it off my computer so I can keep this up here. Tres tristes tigres comen trigo en un trigal. Tanto trigo tragan que los 3 tigres dragones con el trigo se atragantan. So you see, right, it's a little bit tricky to do, but it helps you with some of your sounds, right? And you could use it to kind of help you with certain vowels or even certain consonant sounds that you're struggling with. And there are so many. Another one is this one, right? Which is very famous and very well known. These are 2 that are well known, which is called El Perro de San Roque. El perro de San Roque no tiene rabo porque Ramón Ramírez se lo ha cortado. Y al perro de Ramón Ramírez, quien el rabo le ha cortado, right? So that one practices the r sound, right? So that could be a little bit helpful for you. one thing that's important, right, is to not try to compare the way that we would pronounce things in English and the way that we would pronounce things in Spanish. Let's be honest, English can be really confusing, right? But when we learn another language, you think, oh my gosh, this doesn't make any sense. It's also very confusing. And that's true, right? It is a little confusing because it's new to us, but there is a system there. And, that's part of just learning another language. For example, when people learn English, they might get confused whenever they see the word read and read and realize that they're actually spelled exactly the same. Or the word wound and wound, right, which are spelled exactly the same. In English, people might look at the word down and think, why does down have something like 21 different meanings and it's only one word? So that's something kind of similar, right? Now in Spanish, you might think, oh my goodness, why don't you pronounce the H? Or why is it that G-E, G-I, and J all sound the same? Why does C-O, C-A, and C-U sound like a K sound, but C-I, C-E, S, and Z all sound like a S sound? It's just how it is, right? Spanish is a very, very old language, dating back to sometime in the early medieval period and even earlier. It was actually codified long before English was even a language. So it's been around a very, very long time. And like all languages, it's dynamic, right? So that means it's constantly changing. So, and English is a dynamic language. So all languages that are in use are dynamic languages. So it's just something to kind of know, right? It just is what it is, and it just has to kind of be learned how it is. So I would say it takes practice, right? Practice, 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 always. And there are lots of videos online that can also help you with this, but there's some things to kind of remember, just some quick things to remember. Here's some other things that we are talking about this week. How to say hello. Now, as I said in one of my other videos, every Spanish-speaking country is different. So Mexico is not like Argentina, Chile is not like Peru, and Venezuela is not like Costa Rica, right? Spain is not like, well, anything else. They're all a little different, right? So that's the kind of thing to remember. What we're learning here is kind of general ways to talk to people. But if you talk to your Puerto Rican friend and they say, oh, well, we say hello and how are you like this, they're right. Every Spanish-speaking country is a little bit different, has a little bit of a different dialect, a little bit of a different way of saying things. Again, right, I use the same analogy as I used in that other video, similar to how, right, we might say hello differently in the United States, or in England, or in Scotland, or in Ireland, or in Wales, or in Australia, or in New Zealand, or many of the other countries that are English-speaking. All of those things are going to be a little bit different based on the countries that you're in at the time. One of the other things that's important to remember when we talk about greetings or talk about anything having to do with Spanish is be polite, right? So next time we're going to be talking about the formal versus the informal. It's important to remember because it's very much built into the Spanish language. Now, in English, for example, we might say to someone, how are you? And how are you? And we could be talking to the president of our company or our best friend. In Spanish, this is not the case. We would use different ways of talking and different registers of speaking with those different people to indicate politeness. So that's kind of something to remember. Politeness is actually something that is built into the Spanish language. Now, depending on the country that you use, some use it more, some use it less, but in general, right, it is built into the Spanish language, that element of politeness. Here's some greetings and ways of presenting yourself and also of saying goodbye that are in the book, and I'm just going to talk about each one individually. So here we have, hola, buen día, buenas tardes, buenas noches. Hola is just hi, right? Buen día is just hello. You can also say buenos días, and that's probably what's in the book. And you would use this to all day, right? You could say buen día all day, but you could also just say it in the morning. Buenas tardes is a way of saying good afternoon. Generally, in Spain, they say that you only say buenas tardes after lunchtime. But in a lot of Spanish-speaking countries, right, you would just use it in the afternoon. And once it goes to being dark, you would use the word buenas noches. So you would only use this once it's dark, and that would, of course, depend on the time zone and where you're at. But in general, right, you can use the term buenas noches to mean good evening, but you can also use it when saying goodbye, like saying good night, and that kind of thing. Here you have some greetings that you can use with people, right? So you get to say, how are you? Things like, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estás? ¿Cómo está usted? Now, each of these are varying levels of formality. ¿Qué tal is very, very, very informal. You would only really use this with people that you are familiar with, people that are friends or family. There are other ways of saying ¿qué tal?, right? You could say ¿qué hubo?, ¿cómo andas? You know, there are lots of different ways of saying this exact thing, but those are also, again, they're more informal and they would be used more in informal registers. Now, according to my Spanish professor, and I use the word Spanish to mean from Spain, he said the only way you can answer the phrase ¿qué tal? Is with bien, right? Because it's like saying, how are you? And when in English we always say, oh, fine, right? That's the only appropriate way of answering that. We wouldn't even say estoy bien, we would just say bien, right? In a very short version. We would never elaborate or say to someone, oh, I'm having such a terrible day. This is just a quick check-in, right? And they're saying ¿qué tal? Because they don't want to ask you how you really are, right? Here's some other ways of saying my name is or where am I from, right? And they're all in the book, right? You could say ¿cómo te llamas? ¿Cómo se llama usted? That's informal and formal, right? And then you would say me llamo. One of the important things to remember here is that this is a loose translation, and most of the translations you will read in the book are translations of the concept of the language rather than the literal word for word translation. When you say me llamo, llamo is a verb that means to call. So it's actually also a verb that you would use like if you called somebody on the phone or other contexts that you would use the word call. So when you say me llamo, you're saying I call myself by this name. It's not literally my name is. If you want to say my name is, literally you would say mi nombre es. But when you say mi nombre es, you're only talking about your first name. And you would only use that in a context when someone has asked you for your name. Like if you go to a conference and they might say nombre, right? What's your name? And you would give them your name. Mi nombre es whatever. And that's only talking about your first name because there's a different word in Spanish for your last name, which is apellido. So you would say mi apellido es, right? So, but if you were going to talk about your whole name, you would always say me llamo. Now, one thing that I often see Spanish students get confused is they will use two verbs together and say something like me llamo es. This is very incorrect. And there's already a verb here, so you can't put another verb next to it. It would be like saying, my name is calls. It doesn't make any sense. Here are some ways to say I am from, right? ¿De dónde es usted? ¿De dónde eres, right? So formal and informal. And then you would say, soy de los Estados Unidos. Now, here's just a small note on the term America. So in Spanish-speaking culture, the term America refers only to a continent and not to a country. So when we want to talk about the United States, the term that we have to use is Estados Unidos. If we want to say I am American, we have to say soy estadounidense. Now, some countries do use the term Americano to refer to people who are from the United States. That can happen, but I caution you with using that because in some countries, saying soy americano, meaning I am from the American continent, I'm American and I own this whole continent, is very offensive. So I would veer away from that when in doubt and use the term soy de los Estados Unidos o Soy estadounidense. I am American. I am a United Statesian. Here's some ways to say goodbye. Ciao, adios, hasta luego. Hasta luego meaning like see you later. Hasta pronto, see you soon. Hasta mañana, see you tomorrow. You can also say nos vemos, that's like saying see ya. You can also use the word hasta with days of the week, right? So you might say hasta sábado, hasta martes, hasta el fin de semana, until the weekend, right? Things like that, right? So that's another way of using it. I hope that this helps whenever you are looking through the material and going over everything. And it's just kind of a quick thing to do. It's not overly detailed. But if you have any more questions, don't hesitate to email me and ask me anything that you need. All right, see you next week.